Hello, I'm Mairi Dupar. I'm with the Climate and Development Knowledge Network. I'm here in Cancun, Mexico at the COP16, and I have the privilege today of speaking with Shafqat Kakakhel, who is one of the Pakistani delegation here. Good day, Mr. Kakakhel.
Thank you.
Maybe you could introduce us to climate change issues in your home country of Pakistan by telling us what are some of the current impacts of climate change your country is already experiencing?
Well, Pakistan is considered number 16 in the list of most vulnerable countries as far as the impacts of climate change are concerned. The IPCC had in fact mentioned that South Asia will be one of the worst affected regions. And the impacts that it mentioned included the disturbance or destabilization of the climatic system of the monsoon rains, the rapid melting of the glaciers which provide water to the major rivers of the sub-region, the rising levels of sea, the increase in the number and intensity of natural disasters which have a relationship with climate, and also an increase in the number of displacements caused by natural disaster, and of course the health impacts of rising temperature, which also means food and agriculture, because we are an arid or semi-arid or hyper-arid country. 2/3 of Pakistani land, cultivable land, is arid or hyper-arid. So without irrigation, without water, it will not produce anything. Now our water comes from essentially two sources. The glaciers, the Himalaya, Karakoram, Hindu Kush glaciers, which is the second largest glacier system in the world. And the second source, this is about 65% of the water in the Indus water, in the Indus River system, is provided by the glacial melt. The second biggest source of water is the monsoons, the twice-a-year torrential rains, which replenish the rivers as well as provide the water for the underground aquifers. Both the glaciers and monsoons are subject to adverse impacts. Both will be disturbed. So basically, and as I said, with water, you will have poor agriculture, and in a country where the population constantly grows, we already have over 170 million people. It can have dire consequences. The floods, which the meteorological organization of headquarters, the chief scientist, acknowledged and admitted, there was a relationship between the unprecedented floods, which affected more than 20 million people, and climate change. So we have the impacts of climate change coming at a time when we are caught up in a vicious struggle to combat poverty, to try and achieve socio-economic development, as well as fight terrorism, religious-based extremism and terrorism. So that's a nutcracker, or I don't know, the developmental challenge with the climatic challenge coming at the same time.
Yes.
But we have to act, and we have to act in a determined way to take care of both the developmental and the environmental imperatives.
Clearly you're facing a tremendous challenge, and the viewers will appreciate that. How do you even get started to tackle these challenges together? Do you think Pakistan is geared up to help its people develop in an era of changing climate? Or what else needs to happen to get you to that place where you want to be?
Well, the government established a task force which presented its report, which makes recommendations for policy and institutional measures covering all the four major areas of mitigation, adaptation, development of technology, and the mobilization of resources. And now, of course, the even harder task is how to go about setting up the institutions and implementing the policies. But I think there is today a much greater awareness, there is a much greater recognition of the need to integrate climate policy into the overall developmental policy. Because I think this is a mistake that is sometimes made, that we talk too much about climate without bothering about the developmental imperative.
Indeed. Now, you're something of an expert on climate finance, and I know that you've been looking long and hard at the Fast Start finance that was offered by developed countries to cover the period 2010 to 2012. Now, they pledged $30 billion in Copenhagen, as we know. Has Pakistan managed to benefit at all from this package?
No developing country has in fact benefited from the Fast Start climate because it hasn't happened. In fact, one of the reasons why scores of developing countries agreed, somewhat reluctantly though, to endorse the Copenhagen Accord was that it offered these two windows. The window of 10 billion a year for 2010, 11 and 12, and then the collective commitment on the part of developed countries to mobilize 100 billion a year by the year 2020. Now, nothing has happened actually. Not only has no OECD country come forward with any significant money, but this point was even omitted from the reference of the high-level advisory group of the Secretary General. The advisory group does acknowledge the existence of that pledge. I think the rapid action kind of money is indeed needed, because you cannot start, even if you have money, you cannot start actions. You have to prepare the way. You have to have institutions. You have to produce the information that will be at the base of decision making. Then you have to have the plans of action and all. So if we had the 10 billion a year, this will be enough for those kind of activities.
When it comes to the longer term framework, the 100 billion eventually to be committed and delivered, the G77 nations have argued strongly that this should come from public funds, whereas the developed countries have said it should be a mix of public and private. What's the reasoning behind the G77 position, which Pakistan has very much supported?
Well, the G77 position is based on the two international agreements on climate change: the Convention of 1992 and the Protocol of 1997, both of which acknowledged, and it was not a G77 convention, it was a global convention, which all the OECD countries, which were listed in Annex 1 of the convention, they all went along. Now, in that, there was a mention that because the climate change problems were created by the emissions of the advanced countries, they had a special responsibility to address the problem, first by reducing their own emissions, and second by supporting the developing countries in the twin tasks of adapting to the adverse consequences, as well as avoiding the trajectory of carbon-based growth. So the G77 essentially takes its position from the environmental and developmental and equity imperatives that are embedded in the convention, which was so painstakingly negotiated and sealed in Kyoto. They are not saying anything that is new. In fact, the new thing is the innovative sources, which started with there is a mention in the Bali action plan, which developing countries accept. So developing countries do not deny that things have changed, that the state is now not the only source of money, that money can be generated by a public-private partnership. But they think that the public-private sources do not come unless there is a profit margin. So how many business houses will support developing countries' adaptation when there is no money to make? So we believe that the aid should come from public sources and investments should come from private sources. So there should be a happy balance between the two.
That's very clear. Thank you. Well, Mr. Kakakhel, I see that there is a long road to forming and building up climate-compatible development in Pakistan, as with many, many other developing countries. I wish you the very best of luck, and I thank you for your time today.
Great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.